Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started. It looks like we have started to slow down on people entering. So I'm going to get started. Doug, I don't know if you want to share your screen so that we can start with the PowerPoint, but I wanted to welcome everyone. I am Megan Vinn, and I am the co-director of the STEM Innovation for Inclusion and Early Education Center, or STEMIE, as we like to call it. And we're so excited that you're joining us here today to have this hear this session on what counts in teaching and learning for all young children. And I know I'm really excited. I'm going to let them introduce themselves as well, but I'm really excited to be joined by, I'll introduce Ching Lim, who is my co-director as well. And I'm excited to be joined by Doug Clements and Julie Sarama and Becky Chance and Tracey West, who are all STEMIE team members who are going to be sharing, who are going to be doing the bulk of the work today. I'm just here to welcome you all and say hi. And I don't know, Doug or Julie and Tracey, if you guys wanted to say hi, or you just want to wave so they can see who you are.
Wave
All
is
right.
good. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks. And I wanted to share, I think it would be great to hear who you are in the chat. And so if you want to put your name, maybe where you're from, and your role, we would love to hear that from you. And I know Ching is looking at the chat to see, I see some hellos and some welcomes, so we're glad you're here with us. But we'll check back, that'll help us know who you are and where you're from. All right, if you want to go to the next one. All right, so I'm just going to do a quick little bit of an overview so you know who we are before I turn it over to Doug, Julie, Becky, and Tracey. And thanks, keep it coming. I'm so glad to see we have some faculty and some consultants, or some teachers and practitioners, a math consultant or specialist. That's exciting. We're glad you could join us. And so who we are, like I said, we're all with the STEM Innovation for Inclusion in Early Education, or STEMIE. We are really a partnership among, as you can see, a couple of things. We have some groups at the University of North Carolina out of the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. That's where Ching, myself, and Tracey are from. We also have partners with Doug and Julie, who are at the University of Denver, the Marsco Institute, and Becky as well. And I think you'll notice we have another consultant at Public Health Management who really focuses on early intervention, or birth to two. And then, as you can see, we have other folks from consultants or others who really have some STEM or inclusion expertise. And if you go to the next one, I think what we often see ourselves as for the STEMIE Center is a marriage of inclusion and early STEM learning. And so you'll see that our center outcome really is to ensure that young children with disabilities participate and benefit from high quality STEM teaching and learning. We recognize that there is a opportunity gap where a lot of young children, birth to 5 with disabilities, are excluded from the opportunity to participate in STEM. And so for us, it's really important that we find ways to support practitioners and faculty and families, and anyone else who, service providers, anybody else who really works with young children with disabilities, to ensure that we're including children and providing opportunities to engage in high quality STEM teaching and learning. And so, and I think last, I'm just going to share a couple of logistics for you. First, we want you to remember to mute your audio, although we hope that you'll enter questions or things into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll be trying to make sure that we're connecting with you as we go through. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Doug and Julie. Although I'm excited to see that we have folks from Jamaica and et cetera who are here today with us, joining us to learn about this. So I'm going to turn it over.
From a wide variety of roles too, huh?
Yes. I know, it's really exciting. We're so glad you could all be with us, and we hope to hear from you. So keep putting your questions in the chat, and we will continue to engage throughout the presentation. So, all right, Doug or Julie, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Well, thank you, Megan, the great introduction. And I do like the fact that we saw in the chat people from so many backgrounds. You know, initially, whenever we do that kind of thing, it's good because then you're like, oh, great, we're going to tailor the presentation a little bit towards one way or the other. But the group is so wide and so diverse and from so many places. Somebody from Ireland in
We're
there as
either
well.
going to be all wrong or we can't go wrong.
Exactly. So we're just gonna plow ahead and hope we can get some things out of this. So we're going to talk about learning trajectories, and the first thing we'll talk about is one of Doug's favorite surprises.
The children can learn an amazingly broad, complex, and sophisticated mathematics. We're a little biased, but we really do believe mathematics is at the core of STEM. And the research bears this out. Okay, a lot biased. We love mathematics, but we also know that the research backs us up that from the very earliest years to graduate school, if you don't have a good foundation in mathematics, you tend to struggle in the other STE parts of STEM. The good news is young children can learn an amazingly broad, complex, and sophisticated mathematics. So these kids have been doing well with our learning trajectories approach through the year. But the cool thing was they grabbed this puzzle off the shelf. It wasn't part of our idea. They just grabbed it off the shelf, and Cory started putting 4 triangles together to make squares and plopped them in the puzzle. Let me picture those for you. So they're 4 triangular blocks, and then put into a square, puts it in the puzzle, does it again, does it again. The other boys come along and want to help, but the one boy sees the square structure but builds the wrong square. He only uses 2 of the triangular blocks to do so. And they have a long conversation. They finally finish the puzzle. Cory shows an adult who says, how many triangles did you use? And Cory very carefully counts up to 24. Good counting for a 4-year-old. Teacher doesn't stop. 24 what? Triangles. How many squares do you have? And Julie and I love this part of it because what Cory does is curl up one finger and leave 4 fingers on each of the squares and counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in the 2 domains most important for young children's foundations of mathematics, number and geometry, Cory and his friends are not only operating competently, but they're thinking about a pretty sophisticated idea, units of units. In other words, they can count the individual triangles or they can count them as a group. They can see the triangles or they can group them in their minds and see them simultaneously, triangles and squares.
And that's like a really powerful concept because we're not used to thinking about it in early childhood because we don't think about it until it's place value, when you have 1 10 and 10s 1s and you're breaking up 10s and, you know, all the stuff that we tend not to think about. But the reality is really young children understanding it at that level, something very concrete, something he can see, but the way he counts it as 2 different ways really show that his ability to think about units of units. But really what we're trying to showcase here is all children have abilities in math and STEM that are unrealized for the most part. So
indeed, you know, some show specific mathematical learning disabilities at young ages, and they're not typically identified. So for those very small percentage of cases, they fall farther and farther behind, and it's particularly unfortunate, right? Because from numerical processing, this kind of fluency that develops a quantitative intuition early on, some kids just don't process it the same way. And you can do something about that. But all children, including children with disabilities, a wide range of disabilities, they all need those foundational skills. So whether it's a specific mathematical difficulty or a wide range of things, we need to attend so they develop all these times.
Yeah, I mean, the big takeaway is don't ignore it. Don't exclude children because you think that they may one day have difficulty, even if it's a specific mathematical difficulty. We're not talking about a wide range of problems here. But we will say that yesterday we were working with teachers, and one of the things the first grade teachers said was kids are coming without those foundational skills and that they had nothing to build on. And I really think that I think what we're trying to say is if we do our work in early childhood, give kids lots of great experiences in math, we're building those foundational skills from day one.
That's right.
And so all kids are going to benefit.
And the key adaptation for all kids all kids, including children with a wide range of difficulty, is to start with the child's thinking.
Well, and a wide range of abilities.
Yeah,
Let's start with there.
good
So the idea is that all kids can benefit if we start where they are. The other day we were being interviewed for a Head Start conference, and you know, after talking for a little bit, the guy said, how do you break down these math topics for young kids? And
it's a typical perspective.
It's a typical perspective, and the answer is we don't break down the hard math for little children. We build up math for young children based on where they are. So our whole approach is finding out where children are, building on their strengths, building on the assets that they're bringing, and helping them increase their learning developmentally in a completely developmentally appropriate way. We're honoring the child rather than just honoring the subject matter.
Right. So the breakdown is often seen as you take what the adult knows and you make it into teeny little pieces and you spoon feed them to kids.
Exactly.
Right?
That's not what we're talking about here.
We're talking about building it up for kids. One of the important things to do, though, is to keep expectations reasonable, but not low, especially some kids who live in poverty, who aren't native speakers of English, children with disabilities, often females, and many non-white students have traditionally been far more likely to be victims of low expectations.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. In one of our largest studies, we worked with groups of teachers, and the number one takeaway that helped them keep going and building on their math kids' knowledge long after we stopped working with them was them saying they were so surprised at what their children were capable of. That first slide that just says all children are capable, we mean all children are capable.
And we mean capable of really interesting thinking.
Right.
It doesn't mean they sit down and do math facts, though, right? On worksheets.
Exactly. But if our expectations are, kids can learn, and ideas are, let me investigate that, let me see what they know, we'll be surprised and we'll be able to build on that.
Right. So in part, low expectations are a misunderstanding of kids' potential.
Huge misunderstanding.
But it's also that often special education teachers in their own background weren't alerted to this, the importance or capabilities of kids.
And early childhood teachers for a large also, I can't think of the word, feel the same way. They're not confident. Most adults, let's just go there. Most adults are not comfortable in their own math skills. And when you study this, and when you say we're biased about math, you get into the back of any ride share.
or the old taxis. Right. Taxi drivers always have opinions.
So what do you guys do? I study how young kids learn math. The next thing they say, I'm not a math person. Okay, great. The next thing they say is, what do you think of this new math? Because I don't like it. It's not the way I learned it. And I always wanted to say, well, the way you learned it didn't quite work out for you, because your first statement said you're not a math person. So maybe if we think about it in a different way, we're going to be happy. But the reality is most people feel incredibly comfortable teaching and working with kids in the way that they were taught.
So they do skills only.
They do skills.
Because they're easy to measure and teach. They think that students need a huge repetition, because they don't understand that memory is more solid with understanding than just repetition. And structured drills, this is usually with slightly older kids, right? Often helps with discipline problems. And so that's the way they were.
Sit down and do these 50 facts. That'll make you love math.
Well, it'll keep you quiet, I guess. That's the point, right?
So what we're going to do is talk about the way we do approach this, the way we do try to meet children, the way we try to honor their development and meet all children along a developmental continuum. And that is this learning trajectories approach. And really what they are representations of kids' thinking that kind of develop naturally. Pulls on the research from developmental psychologists, cognitive psychologists, mathematics educators, and teachers.
And early childhood people.
Early childhood researchers, math ed researchers, but especially practitioners. So that we really do have a sense of how kids develop, so that we can
naturally.
So that we can tie into that. So again, it's about honoring the child more than honoring the discipline, and saying, saying, oh, kids should learn their numbers, then their number facts, then addition, then subtraction, and go in that order.
And then way later multiplication, not realizing the kids actually can make groups like those kids we talked about at the beginning.
And kids who really are having difficulty counting probably shouldn't go into adding until they can really understand what counting is. So those kinds of understandings about kids are really the heart of learning trajectories.
And learning trajectories and STEMIE, we're going to embed inclusion. Becky, can you help us out?
I sure can. So just like Julie said, honoring the child. So as the learning trajectories, they start with the goal, which is where do you want that learner to go? And these are individual for each learner. And then that developmental progression is where the child is now. And then the instructional tasks of what can adult practitioners and caregivers do to further build understanding upon that. So the way that we embed the inclusion into these learning trajectories is by focusing first, when you're looking at those goals and developmental progressions, on the environment, the activities and the routines that are being implemented. So how are children able to access their learning? What does the room setup look like? Is the equipment set up appropriately for them to be able to appropriately access it? How is an activity done? Is it set up with the goal and the developmental progression in mind for that individual learner who needs extra support? And then the length of time that's put into the activities and the routines. Then the second thing that needs to be considered is the materials used as we're going towards the developmental progression. How are those materials? Can they be adapted to meet each learner's individual needs? Some examples of that might be modifications to toys, modifying the materials that are using, or assistive technology devices. Some ideas for modification of toys is maybe if we're having gripping or grasping challenges, maybe adding some Velcro to like a bracelet so that the child can actually pick up the materials and move them the way that they would like to move them. And then finally, they're all important, but a very important piece is those instructional tasks, or how are adult practices used to individualize those STEM activities within the daily routine and the environment. So ways that you can do that for inclusion would be modeling the task if they need extra support, adding additional information, maybe where gaps while you're seeing where gaps are occurring, and verbalizing students' actions as they're working. So like one example we've given was a child splashing is actually a STEM activity, but if you're verbalizing those actions, then you're bringing in the vocabulary in the STEM. Oh, I see that the water is coming up as you're hitting the water. So really verbalizing what is happening to include those STEM experiences. And then maybe reducing steps. If you're noticing that the steps are maybe too many or are too complicated, maybe reducing and helping support in those areas.
Thanks, Becky. And actually, do you want to take a second for the chat question?
No, we'll get to it in a little
Oh, all right,
bit.
very
Get
good.
to the numerals.
Very good. So there's 3 parts of learning trajectories.
Okay, so you have the goal, you have the developmental progression, and you have instructional activities, although we've tended to change the name from instructional activities to basically a whole bunch of words that don't fit nicely on a cute slide in a graphic like this. But the idea is—
But it was along the lines of what Becky was just saying, really.
Right, yeah. The idea is that you have a goal overall, and the goal could be like something you think about like a standard, or it could be something that's just like what we call big ideas. You know, what is the big idea behind counting, that we want children to be able to count objects and understand, and maybe count a certain number of objects, or be able to count forward and back. I mean, those are all kinds of like a big idea behind counting. And then we have the developmental progression, all the development that starts from birth that gets you up to that point. Things like noticing number in the environment, to simply being able to say number words, to being able to say number words in a sequence, being able to point, etc. All these are developmental stages that kids are going to go through in order to meet your goal. And then the instructional activities piece, that's everything. That could be a small interaction. It's the environment, like Becky said. It's
everyday routines,
songs and stories and puzzles.
Sometimes teacher-directed small group activities.
Right, whole group, small group centers.
Playful and fun.
Nothing's left out. The idea is we want things to do to help kids move.
So the reason we love this, very quickly, is that there's research on mathematics that has helped us build standards, research on kids thinking that have helped us build assessments, research on instruction and environments and the like that has helped us build ideas for curriculum and teaching. But Julie and I think only Learning Trajectories weaves those three bodies of research into one coherent whole so that they all share this kind of notion. So our goals, incidentally, are not just about skills, for sure, right? Julie, it's about concepts. It's about skills, procedures, strategies, adaptive reasoning, creative thinking, and justification and rationalization, even with the very young. And productive disposition, just a name for affect, right?
Well, Doug, that's a really nasty slide. Can I just say, yeah, I mean, it has a whole bunch on there, but the idea for really young children, what is procedural fluency is, what is strategic competence? It could be something as simple as counting. Conceptual understanding involves a lot with counting. If I count and I can say how many there are, that's a huge concept. Procedural fluency is being able to count those sets, count a group of objects.
Just say one number word after another, for instance.
And doing it well, or knowing what a procedure is, knowing that after 29 comes 30, and then we repeat, and then up to 40, etc.
Well, what about strategic competence then in counting?
What about strategic?
Okay, throw it back. Well, what we mean there is that kids shouldn't just count to count's sake.
Oh, right.
They should count to solve problems.
Exactly.
And that involves a strategy.
Can we make sure that everyone at the table has enough cookies?
And the cookies are over there, and the people at the table are over there. So you have to have an idea of number.
Exactly.
You have to count, you have to get the same thing, then you have to check that it's right. That's a strategy.
And adaptive reasoning, reflection, justification. Simply when you ask a 3-year-old, how did you do that? And they say, I counted. You say, what did you count? And they explain what they did. It's
the beginning of that kind of adaptive reasoning.
Exactly. And all of that, if we're honoring the children where they are, we're asking them how they know, that's going to result in a productive disposition, as opposed to going through a curriculum lockstep and giving them things that aren't appropriate. That's where they turn off to math. That's where they view themselves like our Uber driver,
Uber and taxi
never
drivers.
been a math person.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's particularly problematic when if we have an equity lens. People who think of themselves as not math people
are too frequently
people who are ignored by the system. Yeah. So we want to be sure that all kids see themselves as really capable STEM learners.
So we do have a website that is being infused more and more with inclusion kind of adaptations and the like. It's called Learning and Teaching with Learning Trajectories. It's at learningtrajectories.org.
Right.
All I'm going to say here is look at the topics that are important for young children again.
It's huge. Again, this is would be not a nice slide, but the idea that really young children can engage in so much math is crazy until you kind of break it down and you start looking at it. And I don't like the word breaking it down, but breaking it down for the adults is I'm okay with.
All right.
But simply, kind of saying, even in measurement, what are kids doing? Saying I'm taller than you. We accept
it's the
that.
Foundations.
We accept
Absolutely.
it for 2-year-olds, and
Absolutely.
it's something they can do.
So in this talk, if we have time, and we may not be able to finish everything, we were going to just take a couple of pieces of 2 topics. We'll start with counting. We'll see if we have time to go into shapes. People, you can investigate all this on your own at the website anytime you want to. So remember the 3 parts? Here we go with counting. The goal for counting has actually 3 pieces. We want accurate and fluent counting that's verbal, that deals with counting objects, and groups, and using strategies to solve problems.
So we start with verbal counting. Used to be, back in the day, people called this rote counting. We do not call it rote counting because rote really implies that you're memorizing numbers. And that's not what young children are doing. Young children are seeing the pattern in numbers and using that to count higher and higher.
They know higher and higher. Somebody asked about alphabet and numerals. If I can go there just for a second, nobody thinks that K is bigger than G.
Right.
But kids at a very young age know we're getting higher or more in some intuitive sense.
Right.
The question was actually about, is there a difference between alphabet and numerals? Well, you can
Research.
you can say that kids, when they learn counting words, they might not even know to put them in order, but they rarely mix them with alphabet letters.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So they know they're unique.
They know they're a unique set of vocabulary. And in terms of learning the written numerals versus the written letters, I think probably what the idea that if written numerals are about a quantity, that it's going to be easier to make sense of those.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
There's fewer of them, but an A and a K are just arbitrary things for kids, but 2 is how many I can put in each hand.
Exactly.
So it's got a concrete reference. I do not know research on which ones learn sooner. It's clearly dependent on instruction and the environment and stuff like that. But back to here.
So verbal counting is something kids do for fun. So this is just an example. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Those kids aren't counting because they're told to.
Yep, and they're not. Yeah, that's math instruction. Wait a second. That's not what I'm thinking about. There's no worksheet there. There's no somebody in front of a whiteboard. There's nobody saying, okay, boys and girls, sit down and carefully count to 10. These are kids joyfully reveling in mathematics.
Yeah, but they counted up to 10. How young was that one?
Tennyson was the one without pants is being potty trained. So she's just about 2 in that picture, in that video.
So it depends on experience. It's really not about that you have to be 3 or 4 or 5 to count. Right?
No.
Okay. So that's verbal counting. Take a look at this. What else does counting involve? You see here.
Would you count these for me? How many chips are there all together? Thank you.
Okay, so that first video is kids counting, and they're just verbal counting. And I mean just and not like just. Verbal counting is so important. If you don't have those number words in the right order, you can't count objects. But this girl is able to do something more. She's able to keep one-to-one correspondence between the number words and the objects.
At least with a small number in a row.
Small number in a row is important. If we gave her a kind of like a large group of, like, let's say typically we'll have a page in a book with an illustration of a lot of stars. Kids would have a real hard time doing that same kind of one-to-one correspondence. But with like up to 5 objects in a row, she knows so much. She knows the number words up to 5, so she has that verbal counting piece, at least to 5. She probably can do higher verbal counting. She can take, she says a word and has a point to exactly the object. So it's really a 3-way coordination.
What do you mean?
So she has a number word, she has an action, and she has an object.
And all of them have to be kept in correspondence.
All of them have to be kept in correspondence. And we have videos that show kids who don't quite have that yet.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, this skip objects and things. She does so much right. Then that last question comes, how many are there? And you'll see a look of confusion on her face. It's just like, I just can recount them again. Whether she thinks that means, can you recount them? Because I just gave you the answer. Or whether she has no answer, so just decides to recount them. We know from other, this is an interview, from other interviews with this child, from other items, that if you cover them up, she really doesn't have an answer.
In fact, when she counted 8 and we covered it up, she just said like 23.
Something like that, just the idea that, and if people haven't had that opportunity to do that, I really strongly suggest ask a child to count, cover that up, and then ask how many. So what she doesn't have is to know that last number where it tells how many. She can keep the one-to-one correspondence though. So we're going to say the level she is as a corresponder. And what we're going to do is focus on that and help her become a counter. We show a video.
But she's a good corresponder. So if we're going to teach her, we're going up.
Right. And if you looked at what Tenzin and her friend were doing, they were starting to be corresponders, because even though they were, quote, just verbal counting, like 1, 2, 3. They were not keeping perfect one-to-one correspondence, but that's actually an instructional activity that you and I tell teachers to do.
Exactly. Count and move.
Count and move. So you're practicing your verbal counting. You're good at where you are. We're honoring where you are, but we're pushing it to that next level where we're doing a correspondence with emotion.
Sorry, Julie.
Nope, it's okay. So let's watch this child.
So do you want to introduce this at all?
Nope, let's just watch her
Okay.
and see what's different.
See what's different here.
I do too. I saw you eating them the other day.
These are all
Could you
assessments,
count
right,
those
Julie?
bananas and tell me how many there are? How many? 5.
She doesn't recount.
Nope, she knows. She knows that that last number word tells how many, and that's not just a memory issue. That is a huge developmental step for children based on, gosh, Doug, decades and decades and decades of research. We know this is a huge developmental step, and she's there. So that first girl, we really want to work on things that help her understand that
And
that last
we'll
number
be
word
showing
tells how
one
many. Right.
activity anyway.
But for her, we're going to try to go to the next level. So what is that?
So the next level is the ability to produce a set.
The next slide is the
There we
you
go.
go.
She's counter small numbers. That's what we call it.
And
when-
again, small numbers in a nice straight row and a smaller set of objects.
Yeah, right. So what's coming up?
Producer.
Producer. You'd think if you can count 5, why can't you produce a set of 5? But, you know, kids will often do this, right? I
Up
ask,
higher. There you go.
I ask, you ask me, right?
Can you
give me 5? And I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Right.
9.
So they get kind of a sense that they've gone past it at some point. They're looking at the adult. If anyone's ever given that as an assessment item, you watch kids look at the adult for any sign where the adult starts pulling away their hand because they did it. But the reality is they have a hard time keeping an internal constraint.
Yes.
So they can't stop at the right number.
Because they have to have all these earlier competencies almost automatic, right?
Yes.
Easy. So that their brain, their working memory, has a little bit of extra space to say, 1, that's not 5 yet, keep going. 2, that's not 5, until they get to 5, that's 5, stop.
Exactly.
And that's hard to do if you don't have the earlier levels down pat. Incidentally, this whole notion of cardinality, whether you're counting or you're producing, a recent study came out just a couple of years ago. It's too late to start in the primary school, they found. Massive study, massive review. You need to have those concepts in preschool or you're in trouble later.
Right. You need to know that the last number word tells how many. Now here's a little guy who's really struggling with producing, but you know what I love about this video is even though he is struggling, and this is an assessment, so people get nervous about the word assessment, but our assessments, as you can see, they take place in a grocery store. It's supposed to tap into kids' informal knowledge. It's fun manipulatives. There's a bunch of them, not just bananas, although we've seen a lot of
we see a lot of bananas.
a lot of banana
We have
items.
cereal boxes and other things too.
Yeah, and but also he's struggling, but he's still enjoying himself.
Oh, he's enjoying himself. Yeah.
It did say 5.
He's supposed to put 5 in his shopping cart. You see, he put too many. What does he do?
One, 2, 3, 4, 5. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only one more.
I keep missing him.
1, 2, 3.
Now watch.
I keep missing them.
Do you notice what he's doing? Oh, good. Wait. Oh no, and here it goes again. The video goes on for double this time.
So he's really struggling, and the great part is he says so many positive things to himself.
Yeah.
He says, I can subitize, which we're not talking about, but he understands that he can use his sort of understanding of number to help him out. He says, I'm good at counting, and he knows he can do this. And the problem is he's really kind of struggling, honestly. Producing for him is getting to be a problem because it's also kind of still confusing that ordinal idea of number with a last number guy. Once he names that last guy 5, and that stands for the amount, he thinks maybe if he moves it at the end, then he'll still have 5. So
he's got a weak understanding of cardinality. It only works when he has things nicely in a row.
Right, exactly. So he's on his way.
But he's coming.
He's on it. Yeah, he's on his way, and he definitely is enjoying himself. The next kid.
Mm-hmm. And PowerPoint is confused to go on. There we go. So that's as far as we're going to go, even though there's like 12 more steps in counting, right?
And him saying, wait, I can subitize. What did he mean, Doug? How does subitizing help him
Yes,
count?
subitizing, if you watch me rather than the slide for a minute, is your ability when I go like this for a very short period of time, without giving you time to count, you can kind of just see that there were 4 there.
And young children can know whether it's instantly or not at a very young age.
Yeah. So if it's not instant, they still will recognize this as 2 even before they can count 2.
Right. I mean, a lot of us have seen it as parents or caregivers. When you have a toddler come up to you and they have something in each hand, and they come up and they say, 2. This like ingrained understanding that 1 in each hand is 2 is really, really powerful for kids. Before they can count, they know 2. They might know 3. Again, before they can count. And that seems
That's
weird.
why we do recognition of number and subitizing in parallel with counting, but almost before counting in certain ways, that it's meaningful to kids, even before counting.
So recognition of number is that understanding that those quantities are what they are without it being fast. And subitizing is when you can do it in just a couple seconds, where you're really working off a mental image. I know some comments were like, we need the concrete materials, and we do, but in subitizing, we're also trying to build in those mental images, which are very concrete for young kids. They see 3 objects, they see 2 objects in their mind's eye.
Yep,
so it's as concrete as
you
the
got to
stuff out
start
there.
with concrete, but you don't. A misunderstanding of Piaget's concrete operational means that you have to wait till 6 or 7 before you build those images. They hit those images in the first year of life.
Yep. So how do you use that to help us count?
Let's just compare 2 ways that a teacher of 3 and 4-year-olds, for instance, might practice counting. And let's compare them and think about what Julie said about subitizing as we do. So this is a typical way. We see this all the time. The teacher will point to I hope you can see my cursor, okay? That's my pointing. Teacher will put out a set of cubes, point to an object, and tell everybody, count with me. Go ahead, Julie, count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good counting. And that's about the end. Or you might put out a different amount and do it again. How does that compare with a more learning trajectories approach? Well, we might first set it up to be more interesting and motivating to kids by saying, hey, you know those inch cubes we always do math with? This morning I thought, I wonder how many of those I can fit in my hand. So behind my back, I hold in one hand as many as I could fit. Let's count to see how many. Now I'm going to kind of do it here, but also switch to the screen here. So I take out 1 and show the kids, and we all count. 1. I take out another, 2, another, 3, and the other, 4. Then I show my hand and I circle the group and say 4. That's how many I could fit in my hand. Your hands are smaller. I don't think you can fit as many as I could, but I put the inch cubes out and you see how many you can fit in your hand later. Stop.
Okay.
Both are simple lessons, but there's big differences between them.
All right. So we'll start with the easy one. And the easy one is that it's a challenge. It's solving problems. It's what you were talking about, strategic competence. It's also talking about, again, a good disposition, saying, I'm powerful math person. I am a math person. I can use counting to help me solve a problem, which is really, how many can you hold in your hand?
So the first one you think didn't have a problem?
No, it was counting for counting's sake, which honestly, some kids like. I mean, after all my years working with young kids, there are those kids who are just counters and they count everything.
Going upstairs, downstairs.
Yep, and
that's wonderful. No problem.
That is awesome. Like we saw the little girls counting for fun. That is great. Counting in itself is a great thing.
But if you don't understand the cardinality idea that the last number word tells how many, there's no reason for you to know how many. All you're doing is pointing and saying numbers.
Exactly. Now that's the easy one. The hard one is, in the first one, when I'm counting 1, how many am I seeing?
4.
I'm seeing 4. When I count 2, I still see 4.
4.
So 3, I'm pointing to the third object, but I'm still seeing 4. When in the second way, when I say 1, I see 1. And because infants are born with this intuitive understanding of number, I'm able to tie that to what I call, my recognition of number.
Right.
Like that little guy said, right? I can subitize. So when I say, when we go to 2, I see 2. So even if I'm having trouble counting, I'm starting to say, whoa, wait a second.
Oh, when you count, every number means how many you've got so far.
How many I have. 3, I see 3. 4, I see 4. And the idea that counting is starting to make sense to me. It's not just an action. It's not something you just asked me to do. It is a conceptual leap, as we say.
So you're moving in the counting learning trajectory and the subitizing trajectory, but really powerfully, those two learning trajectories help each other grow too.
Yes, exactly. Somebody said it's like flashing sight words to reading, and I would say that once you get sight words, they can serve as bootstraps, so that when you're reading and you stumble upon things, you have strategies, but they serve as bootstraps and help fluency. So subitizing is like that, but it also is a separate kind of part of your brain and your understanding and melding.
It comes in the first weeks of life. We know experiments show that kids have the beginnings of that sensitivity.
Right, they wire these kids up.
It's not all learned. Some of it actually comes with us at birth.
Right. And we also know that if we slow it down and we always have kids count, they'll go backwards and they don't stay good at subitizing. And we can keep subitizing with kids for years, really. It doesn't start at birth and end at 4. It's when they can count. It starts at birth and keeps going up through the elementary grades.
Right. And I'm wondering, Julie, if you agree with me that, we've got 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do these slides, or do you want to jump to the end?
Nothing makes me happier than listening to Doug narrate videos of kids doing puzzles, because Doug's not a big sports guy. But
skip
all that. Watching Doug's not a big sports guy, but
this is my only chance to narrate.
Yeah, he does it exactly like a play-by-play.
So in this little girl, and I'm going to turn down the sound actually on this one because they just talk about the task. The interesting thing is what you see. So this little girl, you can see, that's her puzzle. She did a first puzzle down at the bottom right. Do you notice that had triangle ears and she used square? The one up here has rhombus ears, but she puts on a trapezoid.
Right.
So you almost want to say, this is a foundational level, but she doesn't really know what she's doing. Yes, she does. She sees the symmetry of the feet and the ears. There's always something we can build on.
Exactly.
But we do have to build on that to get her to at least match shapes. Now let's go up 2 levels in the learning trajectory, okay? So what happens in those 2 levels is, let me picture this first before I start the video. Do you see down in the bottom right, she's going to try to put a square in where you and I can see that only the blue rhombus or 2 green triangles are actually going to fit. Watch what she does. She tries to put the square in and it pushes the other two out of the way. So what she tries to do is fix those and hold them down and push the square in. Well, that doesn't work either. So she gives up, she puts the square away, and lucky for her, right next to her hand is the blue rhombus, and that fits. It's a big advance over the first little girl in terms of her capabilities, but it's not still where we want to start because she's just doing trial and error. Compare that to this little girl. Wow. When she looks at the puzzle, first of all, she uses symmetry very explicitly. First fill in on one side, then the mirror image on the other side. Second, she really looks at the puzzle and she doesn't just grab a shape and see if it works. She knows it works.
Exactly.
She's got what people call anticipation, right? So watch how long she spends looking at the puzzle, looking at the shape. She analyzes it, and then watch this, everybody. Once she picks up a shape, watch where she looks at the puzzle. She doesn't even look at the shape in her hand. What she does is look at the puzzle and let her image of the shape in her hand direct the movements of her hand so the puzzle comes down on the paper at exactly the right
Well, and
place.
there you have it,
It's
guys.
amazing.
You have the concrete that's becoming for her concrete internally.
At 4 years of age.
At 4 years of age. This is very much experiential. In other words, we can have really, really young children who are excellent.
3-year-olds are at a higher level than many second graders if they've had the experience.
Exactly. This is about giving kids lots of experience. But what we don't do is we don't say,
I'm going to skip that one.
Yeah. What we don't do is give all kids the same puzzle. We don't say, hey, everybody do exactly the same puzzle and assume that we're going to have
So
the
the
same
first girl
confidence.
might get this one because we want her to see how they compose, but we want her to give all the internal lines so she can just learn to match.
Right. If she's just matching shapes, that's okay. By matching shapes and having them touch, she's going to start
And
figuring
she's
it out.
learning about how to combine the shapes so then she can do it on her own on a fairly easy puzzle.
Right. And what makes this easy is once I put in that hexagon, because
For the head there?
for the head screaming hexagon. And once I do that, that gives me a huge clue to the next piece that's going to fit. And so each piece I place gives me a big clue, and it kind of is like writing in the lines. But if I had given a child this puzzle, she was very interested in doing it, and she was struggling, then me as a teacher, I can simply draw in the lines if it's on paper and
Exactly.
make it just
and
a few
make
lines.
it a scaffolded puzzle for
Where
a level
again,
below.
I'm honoring the child. I've seen a lot of classrooms where they just get the stack of pattern block puzzles and all kids pick it. And so you have the kids pick, I want the rocket, kids who can maybe do way more than the rocket. And I want the ducky for children who are really struggling. And so there are ways teachers can still
Give them a choice, but a choice that's going to be achievable even though it's challenging.
Exactly. And because if we know one thing, even it's sort of obvious in number, but in shapes and geometry, that's a similar thing. That if we give kids stuff that is too, they really, like that first little girl can barely match shapes.
Mhm.
And she's really, but she has some symmetry. She has stuff going on. If we don't take advantage of her assets and help her move through, she will end up getting frustrated.
Yeah.
And she'll end up thinking of herself, maybe it won't be a math person, but she might be a puzzle person, like Doug here. He thought of himself as not a puzzle person up until me. Really
Okay,
giving
jigsaw
him
puzzles confuse me still.
proper scaffolding, and he actually helped last weekend. So anyone,
All right, moving on.
at any age.
Moving on. Another problem with commercial materials, by the way, is every single puzzle has all the lines drawn in.
Yes.
So then this has been sold to kindergarten and primary grade people.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. They don't learn shape composition that way. The third girl would get something that has a lot of amorphous regions and places where you really have to think about the angle, size, and everything else.
Hold on 1 second. We had a good question, which was, are we helping her by giving her more experiences matching shapes? One, yes. But two, when we're giving her the puzzles, it's not just shape matching, because you could give her the kind of puzzle that's like a shape and then a space and then a shape and then a space and then a shape.
Mhm.
But in doing this kind of puzzles where it's matching, but they're still contiguous, they
laying
still
the
touch each
groundwork.
other. Yeah, they're still touching each other. And so you're still seeing, you're building again that mental imagery that if I put these shapes together, that they make something.
You know, but I'm sorry I didn't now for that person put in the first puzzle we would give her, where the pieces only touched at the vertices.
Yes.
And it's almost like shapes that are separated by an inch. They touch, but they only touch at the corner.
What we noticed is children who are at that level of the learning trajectory really see shapes as independent pieces. And we want to move them past that to where they're seeing them as parts of a whole. And that's the point of giving those kind of puzzles. Then they start noticing this, that they can go together, but they really are only focusing on the sides. They don't pay attention, like Doug saw the girls trying to squeeze in a square instead of a rhombus, because the side lengths match, you know, for the pattern blocks, but the angles don't. But they don't even
so
notice.
She saw the side. She doesn't perceive angles like you and I would.
Exactly. And then after that, they start perceiving angles, and so we can start playing around with stuff. And this can go like to tangram puzzles, and they can be really complex. It's just one of those wonderful trajectories again that begins
Although we
so
don't
young.
have to go to jigsaw puzzles.
And can end with great 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles we do on the weekend.
Okay, Tracey, we have not given you an even
No,
chance.
She says we're going till 1:59.
All right. Tracey, please interrupt us if you have anything like, what would we do with kids with various disabilities for shape puzzles? And if you have time, Tracey, please join us.
I think what you guys are doing makes sense for kids with disabilities as well, starting where they are, moving them forward. Adaptations, like Becky said, if you have kids that have trouble holding those blocks or trouble keeping them in line, using those adaptations and accommodations. But otherwise, I think, just as you guys have said, finding where these children are and ways to move them on works for all kids.
Yeah, and it's
another question that came in is if she was sort of focusing on squares, would you stay working with squares? And I think that what we always want to do is start where they are. And so yes, if she's kind of making sense of squares, but the more that we can build in experiences with other shapes that have the same side length but different angles, kind of the better, because she again starts building those mental images of all the shapes.
If we only look at squares and equilateral triangles with their base horizontal, by 6 years of age, it's extremely hard for them to have a creative, fluid view of shapes.
Exactly. I was going to say, we want to keep the experiences in the geometry world as wide as possible so that kids don't get a fixed image. So right now, if I say to everybody, think of a triangle, most people are going to think of, you know, an isosceles triangle, a perfect triangle, maybe an equilateral triangle. Maybe some people will think of a right triangle, but you're not going to think of some really crazy elongated
long
triangle.
Right.
Now, for those of us who lived in math land and liked it, you know, we're asked to, well, think about this particular one. But for young kids, they'll see that as not a triangle because it's such a fixed idea. So even though
you found that in 4th grade, I recall.
Right. Even though we're not really trying to teach shapes by doing this, we're really talking about composition, which remember that little boy in the beginning who was talking about units and units? Mm-hmm. That's a composition activity. It was composing shapes.
It's simple.
Right.
You know, but they just made the unit out of the 4
exactly.
triangles.
But in doing so, you're also giving experience with lots of different shapes. The more you can, the better. Would I start with tangram shapes? Probably not, although there's some really easy tangram puzzles, but that can get pretty tricky pretty quickly when you start putting them together.
Yeah.
That's again where scaffolds come place for those kids that come in, those kiddos that come in that have a real gift for it, are really at the top end and really want to challenge. Using tangram puzzles for, again, being careful of their level is another way to challenge them.
So why is this so powerful? Because research all over the place, all ages, says formative assessment, using the kids' knowledge, just like Tracey and Julie have been saying several times, to plan or adjust what you're doing with an individual kid, relies on three key questions. Where are you trying to go? Which is the learning trajectory goal? Where are you now? Which is the level of thinking along the developmental progression the kid's at? And how can you get there? And that's what Julie was talking about, the environment, the activities, the teaching strategies, all that kind of thing. And listen, people, I'm going to shoot through this real fast, but we have conducted research with actually hundreds of teachers and thousands of kids. This is a study with 36 classrooms randomly compared to not only business as usual, but a comparison group that had all the professional development and new resources, but did not use learning trajectories.
Right.
It really makes a difference.
And what they did was just typical, right? It was like a unit approach. So first we're going to do counting.
And then stop counting.
Then
for
we're going
the
to
year.
work on our shapes.
And then stop shapes.
We're going to do patterning. Then we'll go back to another counting unit, but we'll work on something else. And so it kind of is more of a typical way that we were, again, the way we were taught. And this is a totally different way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. And how about this real quickly, Julie? What does language and literacy has to do with it?
So again, we're having some good questions. And
do you want to skip this again?
It's just somebody agreeing that puzzles are good. And again, Tracy's saying that adaptations of those puzzles are probably really important and absolutely. And
yeah,
somebody
Tracy,
gets saying puzzles are huge. So they're good for all kids, we think. But language and literacy was something that some people were worried about were suffering. Kind of the idea that if we're spending time on STEM, what happens to all the time that I spend on literacy? And that became because teachers' eyes were open to the possibilities of STEM and they felt themselves doing so much more STEM. So we went back a year after we worked with, well, a summer after we worked with the kids, and we retested them looking for probably a delay, right? I mean, kids lose things over the summer. What we did is we looked at both groups and said, the kids who we're working with, did it at least not harm them? Were their language scores equivalent? Did they know as many letters?
And did we take away from language and literacy because we did more math?
Right. One of these early childhood superintendents once told me it's a whack-a-mole approach. If we focus on math, then we lose on literacy. We wanted to see to be sure that that wasn't the case, that we weren't taking a whack-a-mole approach. We were including the whole child and just not neglecting the part of all children that's STEM. So we went back and tested them, and the kids did better on language scores. They did about the same on letter naming.
Level letter naming.
Naming, exactly. But they did higher on being able to talk about a story and tell it back, on giving more information, on sentence complexity, on independence. They needed fewer prompts to keep going.
Think about that though, sentence complexity. How could math affect that?
Well, I mean, here's the deal is that, and our math curriculum and math approach, I should say, in the Learning Trajectories approach, we want to know where kids are. And the way to know where kids are is to interact with them way more. It's not a right or wrong answer. You really want to know what they're thinking. And so kids were experiencing way more language around math.
Because we're always asking,
how do you know? How do you know? And even kids who struggle with verbal, if I ask a child, how do you know this is a triangle? And they say 3, or even just hold up 3 fingers. What I'm doing is, you're right, that has 3. That has 3 sides. Count those sides with me. And what about the corners? It holds up 3. 3, you're right, they have 3 corners. Let's count. There's so much language going on.
And at later levels, when they solve, if you had 5 and you need 8, how many more would you need? And they have to dig down and say, I got the answer, but how do I talk about it? That's deep.
That's deep
for kids.
And we is a little kid of an example who couldn't put 5 bananas in a cart successfully, but was able to say, I can subitize. That's what we're talking about language.
So
we have
I
15
think we
seconds
gotta, I think we gotta jump right to the end here. Practice-based evidence of success. We got clear guidelines, and we have, it's scalable, especially with the Zoom culture. You could do these things and understand these and learn about it more from learningtrajectories.org.
Yep. Our goal is to make all early childhood providers experts on how kids learn math. All right, over to you.
Jean.
All righty. Thank you so much, Doug and Julie. As usual, I've learned so much from your end. So I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. And we do have a professional development series. This was the very first one. There are maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 more coming up in the this year. And then next slide, please, Doug. And then for some of you who have joined us last year at STEMIE Fest, we are going to have STEMIE Fest 2021 in October. So save the date registration details will come up much soon. So thank you so much to all of you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.